A woman opened her front door and saw a clown standing on her porch. She smiled. Those were her last happy seconds alive. This is not a movie. This is not something someone made up. This happened on a Saturday morning in May 1990 in one of the wealthiest, safest neighborhoods in the entire United States, in broad daylight, in front of her son. And the person who planned it had been counting on one thing, that she would smile. They were right. Wellington, Florida was a fortress for the rich. Not rich like a nice house and a good car. Rich like your backyard has a private runway and a hangar where you park your plane. Rich like Bruce Springsteen has a house nearby. Bill Gates was building a property in the area. The Kennedy family played golf minutes away. Mar-a-Lago, 126 rooms, 20 acres of pure power, was in the same orbit. The Aero Club was the crown jewel inside Wellington. Every single home in this neighborhood was built around a private 4,000-foot grass airstrip. Residents flew their personal planes to work 2 or 3 times a week, the way most people drive to the grocery store. Some flew 50 miles each way. They had hangars instead of garages. This was a community where crime was something that happened somewhere else, in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, in the places these people had specifically paid to escape from. Wellington had one of the lowest crime rates in the state of Florida. It was consistently listed among the safest cities in the entire country, which is exactly why what happened on May 26, 1990 didn't just break one family. It broke the illusion that money could protect you from everything. Marlene Warren had earned her place in this world. She was not born into wealth. She grew up in Mount Clemens, Michigan, a small, quiet life on her grandfather's farm with her sisters. She was the kind of person who made things with her hands, who found joy in ordinary moments. She baked, she painted, she laughed easily, but life hit her early and it hit her hard. She was a mother of 2 by the time she was 18. When her first marriage ended, she was 20 years old, alone, with 2 young boys and no safety net. She carried that weight without falling apart. She met Michael Warren, built a second life with him, moved to Florida, and turned nothing into something real. Rental properties in West Palm Beach, a used car business, an airplane, a racehorse, a dream home in the Aero Club. And then, in 1988, her oldest son John was killed in a car accident. He was 22 years old. That loss changed something in the Warren household permanently. The marriage began to crack from the inside. The arguments started. The distance grew. By 1990, Marlene knew her marriage was falling apart, but she kept going, the way she always had. She co-managed the properties. She ran the business. She showed up every single day. That Saturday morning, she was making breakfast for her son Joey and his friends. There was one more thing about Marlene that everyone who knew her remembered immediately, something that, in hindsight, makes this story even more disturbing. Marlene loved clowns, not as a passing interest, as a deep, genuine, lifelong joy. As a teenager, she had sat down and painted a portrait of a smiling clown with her own hands, a canvas her mother surely kept on her wall for the rest of her life. Her family had an entire room in their home dedicated to clown art and figurines. Marlene saw clowns as pure happiness, as color and celebration and innocence. She could never have imagined that someone out there was studying her, that someone had looked at her love of clowns and thought, that is the door, that is how we get her to open it, that is how we make her smile right before she dies. Her own joy was used as the weapon against her. May 26, 1990, Memorial Day weekend. Michael Warren had left early that morning. He was heading to the horse track with friends, a regular routine for him. Marlene was home with Joey. Joey was 21, recovering from a broken leg, his left leg in a cast. He had a few friends over. They were at the kitchen table having breakfast. It was a holiday. Warm weather, no plans, just a normal, slow Saturday morning. Around 10:45, something caught their attention through the glass panel of the front door. Color, bright, unusual color coming up the driveway. Someone at the table actually said it first. Someone had sent a gift, maybe for Joey's broken leg, maybe just a holiday surprise. Whatever it was, it looked cheerful and harmless through the glass. Marlene walked to the door. She opened it. Standing on her porch was a figure in full clown costume. Orange wig exploding out from both sides. White face paint covering every inch of skin, you could only see the eyes. Red bald nose. A wide painted smile in red over the white. Polka dot jumpsuit. White gloves. Black shoes, the only thing not screaming color. In one hand, a bouquet of fresh carnations. In the other, 2 balloons. One with a Snow White image printed on it. The other balloon, silver, floating gently, had 3 words written across it in large letters. You're the greatest. Marlene looked at this explosion of color and joy standing on her doorstep on a Saturday morning. A clown with flowers, a balloon telling her she was the greatest, in the neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened, on a holiday weekend. To Marlene, clowns weren't a symbol of fear. They were everything good. She saw them as pure innocence. The same innocence she had painted as a teenager, the same warmth that filled her family's circus room. She smiled. She said, "Oh, how pretty." She stepped forward and reached out to take the flowers. She was looking at the painted red smile on the white face. She was thinking about who had sent this. She was happy in that exact moment. Genuinely, completely happy. She didn't see the white-gloved hand rising. She didn't see the cold steel crack. In the kitchen, Joey froze. He thought a balloon had popped. That half-second of confusion. The brain trying to make the sound normal, trying to find an explanation that isn't terrifying. Then he heard something else. The heavy, unmistakable sound of a body hitting the floor. He ran to the door. His friends ran behind him. And there was Marlene, on the ground in the doorway, critically wounded and fighting for her life. The carnations scattered across the porch around her, the balloons still floating above her, cheerful and horrible at the same time. Joey looked up. The clown was walking away, not running, walking, calmly, unhurried, like someone who had just finished a job and was heading back to the car. The white gloves, the black shoes moving at a steady, unbothered pace down the driveway toward a waiting white Chrysler LeBaron convertible, no license plate on the back. Joey grabbed his mother's car and tried to chase it. His leg was in a cast. He couldn't catch up. Nearby, neighbor Bill Kramer was out walking his dog. He heard what sounded like a nail gun, that sharp, mechanical crack. He saw the commotion at the house, saw young people running out screaming that Joey's mother had been shot. His wife called 911. But in those few seconds before he got in that car, in the chaos and the horror and the disbelief, Joey did one thing that would matter 27 years later. He looked directly at the clown's face. Through all the paint and the wig and the full disguise, as the figure turned toward the car, Joey looked at the only part of this person that the costume couldn't hide. The eyes. Brown. Deep, dark brown eyes looking back at him without panic, without rush, without a single trace of guilt or hesitation. Then the white LeBaron shifted into gear and coasted away. No speed, no urgency, just gone. Like leaving Marlene Warren on her own front porch was nothing. 2 days later, on May 28, 1990, at 9:30 in the evening, Marlene was taken off life support. She was 40 years old. Joey had been there the whole time, holding her hand, telling her he loved her, telling her they were going to get justice. He watched the machine get turned off. Then he walked out of that hospital alone. Authorities had one word for what happened. Not a robbery, not random, not a mistake, an assassination. Planned, precise, executed by someone who knew exactly where Marlene would be, exactly when Michael would be gone, and exactly what it would take to make her open that door with a smile on her face. The killer had known her, studied her, used her own joy against her, which meant the investigation didn't need to start with strangers. It needed to start with the man who left for the racetrack that morning. The husband. Joey sat next to his mother's hospital bed for 2 days straight. He held her hand. He talked to her even when she couldn't respond. He told her he loved her. He begged her not to leave. And when the doctors finally said there was no hope, when they said the physical trauma was too permanent, too severe, Joey leaned close one last time. He made her a promise. We are going to get justice. Then they turned off the machine. Joey walked out of that hospital carrying a promise he had no idea how to keep. He was 21 years old. His mother was gone. And somewhere out there, a clown had driven away in a white car and simply disappeared. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office moved immediately. Crime scene tape around the porch, evidence bags, photographs, interviews with Joey and his friends. They collected the balloons, the scattered carnations, the props that had been used to make Marlene step forward and smile. They canvassed the neighborhood. They talked to Bill Kramer, the neighbor who heard the shot. And then they did what detectives always do first. They went to find the husband. Michael Warren was not what you would expect from someone living in the Aero Club. Wellington was a world of old money, private planes, and country club dinners. Michael did not belong in that picture. Neighbors remembered him as rough around the edges. One person described him bluntly, a used car rental wreck kind of personality. He never showed up at the country club, never became part of the community fabric the way Marlene had. He was a man living inside a life that Marlene had largely built, and he knew it. He started out as a meat inspector. From there, he opened Bargain Motors on North Dixie Highway in West Palm Beach. Not a showroom, not a luxury dealership. Bargain Motors was the place you went when your credit was destroyed and nobody else would touch you. That was the business model, and Michael ran it with an edge. In 1983, 7 years before Marlene's murder, he had already been arrested for odometer tampering, rolling back mileage on vehicles to make them appear newer than they were. He pleaded guilty, got probation, kept the business running. Strange things had a way of happening around Michael Warren. His plane disappeared once and turned up with a broken engine. Nobody could explain it. A racehorse died under unclear circumstances. Small things, easy to dismiss individually. But together they sketched a portrait of a man around whom convenient accidents tended to occur. Detectives wanted to look at him hard, but Michael Warren had one thing that shut that door immediately. He was at the racetrack. Multiple witnesses. Left early that morning, confirmed on both ends. His alibi was not just solid, it was airtight. Michael Warren did not pull that trigger. That much was established fast. But then detectives found out what Marlene had been saying before she died. Not once. Not in a passing moment of frustration. Marlene had told the two people closest to her, her mother Shirley and her son Joey, the exact same words. She had looked them in the eyes and said, "If anything happens to me, Michael did it." She said it to Shirley with fear in her voice, real fear, the kind a mother recognizes immediately. And when Shirley got the call that her daughter had been shot, her mind went to one place without hesitation. She said it to Joey too. Joey had pushed back. "No way, impossible. This man raised me since I was 3 years old." And Marlene had looked at her son and said, calm and serious, "Don't put it past him." She had been scared enough to warn the people she loved, scared enough to name him by name. She had seen something in her marriage that told her this was where it was heading, and she was right. With Michael's alibi holding, investigators needed to find whoever he might have used. They drove away from the pristine lawns of the Aero Club and headed toward North Dixie Highway. They walked into Bargain Motors, and the moment they started asking questions, every single employee pointed in the same direction. To understand who they were being pointed toward, you need to understand the world of Bargain Motors first. This was not an office full of suits and name tags. This was a gritty, cash-heavy operation where cars were repossessed from people who sometimes came back angry. It was not a safe or gentle business, and running the repossessions, tracking down vehicles in rough neighborhoods, confronting hostile owners, taking back cars from people who desperately needed them, was a 27-year-old woman named Sheila Keene. Sheila was not a background character. It was the kind of person you noticed the moment she walked into a room. She was fierce, magnetic, and completely comfortable in dangerous situations. She carried a gun, told coworkers plainly that people were crazy and you had to be ready. She had recently walked out of a volatile marriage to Richard Keene, a man with a highly dangerous history and a track record of severe federal offenses. A marriage so dangerous, she had filed a domestic violence injunction against him in January 1990 after he grabbed and threatened her. The court granted it immediately. Sheila had spent years surviving environments that would break most people. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She moved through chaos like she had been trained for it. And she was completely, devotedly in love with Michael Warren. Coworker Della Ward said it simply. You could just see it the moment Sheila looked at him. She loved him. You could see it in her eyes. The affair was not a secret. Not at Bargain Motors, not at Sheila's apartment complex. Employees watched them leave together for long lunches and return hours later. They traveled together, claiming business trips. They were openly affectionate in the workplace in a way that left nothing to the imagination. One employee put it plainly, there was no hiding it. The doors were left wide open. At Sheila's apartment, the one Michael was paying rent on after she left Richard, the neighbors had no idea she had ever been married to anyone else. They saw Michael there constantly. They saw him come and go like a man coming home. They assumed, without question, that Michael Warren and Sheila Keene were husband and wife. Meanwhile, both Michael and Sheila told investigators the same story. Just friends. A working relationship. Nothing more. Not a single person who had watched them together believed one word of it. Now here is where the motive stops being circumstantial and starts being terrifying. Marlene Warren was not just Michael's wife. She was the financial architecture of everything they had. The rental properties in West Palm Beach, worth approximately $1 million, were in Marlene's name. The assets, the real estate, the business interests. Marlene had built all of it, and the law protected her ownership of it completely. A divorce would have been catastrophic for Michael. Marlene would have walked away with the majority. He would have lost the Aero Club home, lost the properties, lost the lifestyle, been left with a car lot on North Dixie Highway and nothing else. But if Marlene died, Michael inherited everything, 100%. The properties, the businesses, the life insurance payout, the home. Investigators estimated the total at well over $1 million flowing directly to Michael the moment Marlene was gone. Divorce meant losing it all. Death meant winning it all. But what made investigators' blood run cold was not just the math. When detectives began interviewing the mechanics and salesmen at Bargain Motors, a pattern emerged that went far beyond suspicion. Michael Warren hadn't just been complaining about his wife at home. According to multiple employees, he had walked into that car lot after fighting with Marlene, looked his workers directly in the eye, and made an offer. $10,000 in cash to anyone willing to permanently eliminate his wife. He said whoever did it would never have to work another day in their life. At the time, the employees thought it was a man blowing off steam, a dark joke, the kind of thing frustrated people say and don't mean. But on May 26, 1990, standing outside Bargain Motors talking to detectives, those same employees realized something that made the air leave the room. Michael hadn't been joking at all. The picture investigators were now looking at was complete and damning. Michael Warren had $1 million motive. He had a fierce, gun-carrying girlfriend who ran his repossessions, who had nowhere else to go, and who was completely devoted to him. He had multiple witnesses who heard him openly ask for his wife to be killed. And he had the perfect shield, a racetrack full of friends miles away, while Marlene answered her door. He didn't pull the trigger, which meant the entire case now came down to one question. One person, one name that every single employee at Bargain Motors had already given them. Did the repo woman, the one with the brown eyes and the gun and the devotion to Michael Warren, did she put on an orange wig, paint a smile over her face, and walk up to that door with flowers in her hand? Detectives were about to follow the trail of the carnations and the balloons straight to her doorstep, and what they found there was going to shock even them. Detectives had a name. Now they needed a trail. In every murder investigation, there is a moment where the case either builds into something real or dissolves into nothing. For the Marlene Warren case, that moment came when investigators stopped looking at the big picture and started following the small details. The flowers, the balloons, the costume, the car, each one led somewhere, and every single place they led pointed straight back to Sheila Keene. Start with the balloons. 2 balloons left behind at the scene, one with a snow-white image, one silver balloon with 3 words printed across it, "You're the greatest." Detectives needed to know where those specific balloons came from. They canvassed local stores and narrowed it down fast. A public supermarket on North Military Trail in West Palm Beach. One detail stopped investigators cold the moment they heard it. That Publix was exactly 1 mile from Sheila Keene's apartment. It was Memorial Day weekend. That Saturday morning, people were flooding into that same store, buying things for barbecues, picking up drinks for the holiday. Normal families, normal errands. A warm Florida morning full of people with nowhere urgent to be. 2 employees remembered a woman who did not fit that picture at all. They came in and moved with purpose, straight to the floral section, straight to the balloons, those specific balloons. She wasn't browsing, she wasn't relaxed like everyone around her. Her hair was long and brown, pulled back in a ponytail. Both employees used the same word to describe the way she carried herself. Male mannerisms. A directness, a tension in her movements that did not match the slow, lazy holiday mood filling the rest of that store. She paid and left. That was less than 2 hours before Marlene Warren opened her front door. Both employees picked Sheila Keene out of a photo lineup. Now go back one more day, Friday night, the night before the murder. A costume shop called Spotlight Capezio on South Dixie Highway in West Palm Beach was closing up for the evening. Workers were done for the day, locking up, ready to go home. Then someone knocked on the door. A woman, tall, thin, long chocolate brown hair, big brown eyes. She said she needed a costume. Tonight, right now. The workers told her to come back tomorrow. The shop was closed. She didn't move. She said she couldn't wait. She needed something right now. They let her in. She went straight to the clown section. No browsing, no hesitation. She knew what she wanted. She picked out a full clown suit, an orange afro wig, clown makeup, and a red sponge nose. Then she made one specific request that the workers would remember clearly when detectives came asking. She needed enough white face paint to cover her entire face, not highlights. Not partial coverage, complete coverage, every visible inch of skin hidden under white. She paid in cash, no name, no paper trail. She bought everything needed to stand on a doorstep in broad daylight and be completely unrecognizable. Everything except the shoes. She already had those. She walked out into the Friday night with a bag full of a costume and a plan that was now less than 24 hours from execution. Both employees later sat down with a photo lineup. Both identified Sheila Keene. Now the car, a white Chrysler LeBaron convertible, no license plate, the getaway vehicle that witnesses saw the clown drive away in calmly after the shooting. Detectives needed to know where it came from. What they found was not a random theft. What they found was a plan that had been set in motion 45 days before Marlene died. A rental company called Payless Rent a Car operated near Bargain Motors on North Dixie Highway. A couple named the Restivos had rented a white LeBaron from Payless. When they finished with the car ahead of schedule, they grabbed the yellow pages to find the number and call for drop-off instructions. This is where it gets chilling. Michael Warren had taken out an advertisement for Bargain Motors in that same phone book. The ad featured the words PALESS in large print, nearly identical in appearance to the Payless Rent a Car listing. The Restivos dialed the wrong number. They reached Bargain Motors. Someone at Bargain Motors picked up without missing a beat and gave them clean, confident instructions. Leave the car outside the gate at Payless with the keys in the sun visor. The Restivos did exactly that. They left a white Chrysler LeBaron sitting outside, unlocked, keys visible, and walked away. The car was stolen shortly after. 7 weeks later, that same car was parked in Marlene Warren's driveway. But the phone call alone could still have been coincidence. Someone picked up, gave standard instructions, and the car ended up in the wrong hands. That explanation existed until detectives talked to Claude Poitras. Poitras was an employee at Bargain Motors. He had been there the day the Restivos called, and what he told investigators removed every trace of coincidence from the story permanently. He said that shortly after that phone call came in, he drove Michael Warren and Sheila Keene, together, both of them, directly to the Payless lot. He watched them get into the white Chrysler LeBaron with his own eyes. He watched them drive away in it together, 45 days before Marlene Warren was murdered, and before Michael got out of Poitras' car that day, he turned and said 4 words that Poitras never forgot. Don't say anything to anyone. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a spontaneous act by a jealous woman who snapped one morning. The getaway car had been secured 45 days in advance. Both Michael and Sheila had physically stolen it together. The murder weapon's escape route had been planned nearly 7 weeks before the trigger was pulled. The trap had been built long before Marlene ever walked to her front door. Detectives moved on Sheila's apartment with a search warrant. What they found pulled the net tighter. On the soles of her black lace-up shoes, plain, practical, the exact style witnesses had described on the clown that morning, forensic investigators found fibers, orange-yellow acrylic fibers, the kind used in clown wigs. They took everything to the lab. Under high-powered microscopes, scientists compared those fibers to samples from the orange wig purchased at Spotlight Costumers, to fibers recovered from inside the abandoned LeBaron, and to fibers collected from the balloon ribbon left at the crime scene. The composition matched across all 4 locations. Same material, same structure, same source. The wig's fibers had traveled from the costume shop to the stolen car to the crime scene and onto the bottom of Sheila Keene's shoes. Inside the LeBaron, detectives also found a single strand of brown human hair. In 1990, forensic science was limited. They could not yet extract a full DNA profile from a hair strand the way modern labs can today. But when scientists placed that hair under a high-powered microscope alongside a sample collected from Sheila Keene, what they saw was not ambiguous. The thickness matched. The medulla pattern matched. The color pigment matched. Every measurable physical characteristic of that hair was identical to Sheila Keene's sample. She had been inside that stolen vehicle. Science could see it clearly. But in 1990, a microscopic hair match was circumstantial. It pointed at her. It did not chain her to the wall. When detectives brought Sheila in and laid all of this in front of her, she had one answer for everything. She was out repossessing cars that morning, working in the field. Detectives pushed back. They asked for work logs, bank authorization paperwork, addresses of vehicles she had gone to collect, the name of a single person who had seen her with a tow truck that morning. She could not provide one. Not one address, not one car, not one witness. Repo work runs on paperwork, bank orders, legal authorization, location records. Without those, her alibi wasn't just shaky. It was completely hollow. She had a mountain of physical evidence placing her at a murder scene, and absolutely nothing placing her anywhere else. So here is exactly where the investigation stood. 2 store employees had independently identified Sheila's face from photo lineups, once at the costume shop, once at the Publix 1 mile from her apartment. Matching wig fibers were found on the soles of her own shoes. A Bargain Motors employee had watched her and Michael steal the getaway car together 45 days before the murder. Her alibi had collapsed the moment detectives asked one follow-up question, and the victim herself had named Michael Warren before she died. The evidence was not hiding. It was screaming, 2 eyewitnesses pointing at her photo. A stolen car tied to both her and Michael 45 days prior. Matching fibers on her closet floor. A microscopic hair match inside the vehicle. An alibi with nothing behind it. So why didn't they arrest her? What exactly were they waiting for? The answer lived inside the prosecutor's office. A fatal hesitation, a decision to wait for just a little more that would allow this case to slip through their fingers completely. The investigation would freeze. The trail would go cold. And while justice slept, Michael and Sheila were already planning their next move. The evidence was there. Everyone in that prosecutor's office knew it. The photo lineups, the fibers, the stolen car. Claude Poitras watching Michael and Sheila drive away in that LeBaron together 45 days before the murder. The microscopic hair match. The hollow alibi with nothing behind it. They knew, but knowing and proving are two completely different things in a courtroom. And the prosecutors kept doing the one thing that would ultimately cost them everything. They waited. The internal argument went in circles. Do we have enough? Maybe. But what if a defense attorney tears apart the photo lineup? What if a jury looks at microscopic hair comparison and calls it junk science? What if we go to trial and lose, and she walks free forever because double jeopardy means we never get another shot? So they decided to wait for one more piece, just one more solid thing. That one more piece never came. And while prosecutors debated in conference rooms, the trail outside was going cold by the day. Witnesses moved, memories shifted. The sharp urgency that lives in the first weeks of a murder investigation slowly bled out. Cases don't stay fresh forever. They age, they soften. This one was aging fast. Meanwhile, Michael Warren was not sitting quietly. In 1991, about a year after Marlene's murder, Michael went on the radio. He sat down for an interview, brought Joey with him, and performed the role of grieving widower and wrongly accused man with remarkable confidence. He denied everything, said the police were trying to destroy his business, suggested Marlene had probably been killed by an angry tenant or a disgruntled car buyer, someone from the rough side of their business dealings. The interviewer asked him directly, when had he last spoken to Sheila Keene? Michael barely paused. About a month ago, he said. We don't really talk anymore. At the exact moment he said those words, Sheila was present in his life constantly. The same woman he had just publicly placed a month in his past was close, connected, and very much still there. He looked into that microphone and lied without flinching. It was an unnecessary lie. The kind a guilty man tells, not because he has to, but because lying has become his default setting. In 1992, investigators shifted their approach. If they couldn't build a murder case strong enough for trial, they were going to dismantle Michael Warren's world from a different angle. When detectives had gone through Bargain Motors records during the murder investigation, they had found something else running underneath the car business. Michael had been systematically rolling back odometers on vehicles. Cars with 90,000 miles sold as 40,000-mile cars. People with destroyed credit. People who came to Bargain Motors because nobody else would help them were paying for vehicles they believed were in decent condition. The cars were not. Michael had also been repossessing vehicles and reporting them stolen to collect insurance money, running both ends of the same fraud simultaneously. In October 1992, authorities raided Bargain Motors. When they finished going through the records, Michael Warren was facing 43 counts: racketeering, odometer tampering, grand theft, insurance fraud. He was convicted, sentenced to 9 years. He served less than 4. Michael Warren walked out of a minimum security Florida prison on New Year's Eve 1997. He had entered as a murder suspect and a convicted fraudster. He walked out owing nothing more, at least legally. The murder case was still open, technically. But the files had gone into storage. Nobody was talking about Sheila Keene anymore. And for Marlene's son Joey, time had frozen completely on that Saturday morning in May 1990. He was only 21 when his mother's life was taken right in front of him. The trauma didn't just hurt him, it restructured him from the inside out. The grief came in waves he didn't know how to survive. He found himself spiraling into an incredibly dark place, trying to cope with a reality that no 21-year-old should ever face. The anniversary of May 26th became an unbearable emotional weight. Drive to his mother's grave and sit there in the dark trying to find answers that weren't there. He talked to her at that grave. Asked her questions, got nothing back. He said it himself, simply and honestly, I was just lost. His relationship with Michael had collapsed entirely after the murder. The man who had raised him since he was 3 years old, the only father he had ever known, was now the man his mother had named with her dying fear. Joey could not hold both versions of that person in his mind at the same time. The estrangement was complete. The family that had existed before May 26, 1990 was gone, and nothing had grown back in its place. He was grieving his mother, grieving his family, and watching the case that was supposed to bring justice go completely silent. For years he suffered in that silence. Then, in 1996, something came forward from a direction nobody had expected. A man named John Moran Sr. had spent years working in the orbit of Michael Warren's world, dumping stolen cars, turning back odometers, doing the dirty mechanical work that kept bargain motors running. He was an auto mechanic who knew where bodies were buried. As Moran Sr. lay dying, he made sure certain secrets didn't go with him. He called his son, John Moran Jr., close, and he told him things. He said that on the morning of May 26, 1990, there had not been one getaway car. There had been two. The white LeBaron was the visible one, the one witnesses saw, the one detectives traced. But Moran Sr. said he had personally been driving a second car that morning, a backup vehicle, an escape route that investigators never knew existed. He told his son he knew who had planned the entire murder. He knew where the gun was, he knew where the clown costume had been disposed of, and he gave his son a specific location, a canal in Palm Beach County, where a car had been submerged with the evidence sealed inside. John Moran Jr. brought this to detectives. Investigators took it seriously enough to act. They got divers into that canal at the exact location Moran Jr. provided. They searched the bottom. They found a car. A 1982 Audi 4000s sitting exactly where Moran Jr. said it would be. Inside, tube socks, pieces of blue and red cloth, a shoe sole, no gun, no costume, nothing that could close the case. Either the evidence had degraded beyond recovery after years underwater, or someone had been there before the divers. Either way, the canal gave them a sunken car and nothing that mattered. The murder weapon and the clown costume were never found. Not then, not ever. The investigation hit the floor again. Michael Warren left Florida and built a completely new life. He settled in Abingdon, Virginia, a quiet mountain town far from Palm Beach County and everything it knew about him. He opened a fast food restaurant called the Purple Cow just across the border in Kingsport, Tennessee. He was known locally as a relaxed, friendly guy who ran a good drive-thru and kept his past to himself. His neighbors loved him. By his side was his new wife, a pleasant, soft-spoken blonde woman who went by the name Debbie. He said her father had called her that since she was a little girl, just a childhood nickname. She had dyed her hair, changed her look, and spoken carefully to everyone she met. The people of Abingdon and Kingsport. They were just a sweet, hard-working older couple building something simple together. Nobody in that town had ever heard of Wellington, Florida. Nobody knew about a clown. But in 2002, a detective in Palm Beach County pulled up a freshly filed Las Vegas marriage certificate. And there, under the bright neon lights of a Vegas chapel, the true identity behind the woman called Debbie was finally on paper. Debbie was Sheila Keene, the woman every Bargain Motors employee had pointed to without hesitation, the woman whose face 2 store clerks had picked from photo lineups, the woman whose fibers were on her own shoes and whose hair was found inside a stolen murder vehicle, had married Marlene Warren's widower in a quiet Las Vegas ceremony. Let that land for a moment. The man whose wife had been executed on her own doorstep by a clown was now sharing a home, a bed, a business, and a life with the exact woman investigators had believed pulled the trigger since day one. Mission accomplished. 12 years after Marlene died, they were living in the mountains of Virginia running a drive-thru restaurant, and their neighbors thought they were wonderful. The law was completely powerless. It seemed like the perfect crime had actually worked. Michael and Sheila believed they had outrun the ghosts of Wellington entirely. They thought they were safe. They thought it was over. But what they didn't know, what neither of them could have known, was that science was changing, quietly, steadily, and somewhere in a dark evidence locker in Palm Beach County, a single strand of brown hair was waiting. It had all the time in the world. 24 years had passed. Marlene Warren's case was still technically open. It sat in a filing system inside the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. A thick folder full of photo lineups, fiber analysis reports, witness statements, and a microscopic hair comparison that had pointed directly at one person, but never been strong enough to close the door on her permanently. The world had moved on. Wellington had moved on. Most people who remembered the story filed it away under unsolved, one of those cases that gets talked about and then quietly forgotten. Joey had not forgotten, not for a single day. But in 2014, something changed. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office received a federal grant specifically designated for cold case investigations. With that funding, they built a dedicated cold case unit, a task force that brought together detectives from the sheriff's office, prosecutors from the state attorney's office, and direct involvement from the FBI. Their mandate was simple. Go back to the cases that technology couldn't close the first time. Retest everything with modern forensic tools. See what the science says now that it couldn't say before. The very first case they pulled from the shelf was the one everyone in that building already knew by heart, the killer clown. The hair strand recovered from the white LeBaron in 1990 had been sitting in that evidence locker for 24 years. In 1990, scientists could only place it under a microscope and say, the physical characteristics match Sheila Keen's sample. Same thickness, same pigment, same structure. It pointed at her. It did not chain her to anything. In 2014, the cold case unit sent that same strand to the FBI laboratory for a specialized analysis that didn't even exist when Marlene died, mitochondrial DNA testing. Unlike standard DNA analysis, which requires a fresh sample or an intact hair root, mitochondrial DNA lives inside the hair shaft itself, acting as a biological time capsule that doesn't degrade the way other organic material does. It can survive for decades, sealed in an evidence bag inside a storage locker. It carries a genetic signature passed down through the maternal line, unique, stable, and virtually indestructible. The FBI team extracted the sequence from that 24-year-old strand. The results came back with one conclusion. The mitochondrial DNA profile matched Sheila Keen Warren. Not similar, not probable, a match. The kind that stands up in federal court, the kind no defense attorney can wave away with talk of coincidence or contamination. After 24 years sitting in a dark evidence locker, that single strand of brown hair had just become the most powerful piece of evidence in the entire case. Sheila's own biology had waited patiently in that stolen car for 24 years, and now it was ready to testify. With the DNA match confirmed, investigators began building the updated picture of where Sheila and Michael were now. What they found genuinely stopped the detectives who had worked this case from the beginning. Michael Warren, the man whose wife had been tragically targeted by a clown, the man who had been the prime suspect from the very first anonymous phone call on the afternoon of the murder, had married Sheila Keen in Las Vegas in 2002. They had built a quiet life together in Abingdon, Virginia, a mountain town where nobody knew anything about Palm Beach County or a woman shot at her front door. They owned the Purple Cow restaurant in Kingsport, Tennessee, just across the state border. A small, popular drive-thru known locally for good food and an easygoing couple who ran it 6 days a week. Michael and Debbie Warren, as the locals knew them, were fixtures in that community. Warm, generous, completely ordinary. When State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg learned that Michael Warren had married Sheila Keen 12 years after Marlene died, he used exactly 3 words: mission accomplished. But investigators didn't just find a marriage certificate. When they started quietly asking questions around the Purple Cow, what came back from former employees was something that made every detective in that task force go still. The rumor had been running through the restaurant staff for years. Debbie had killed Mike's ex-wife. He had dressed up as a clown to do it. Former employees told investigators they had heard it said more than once, not as wild speculation, but as accepted background information. Something dark and open that explained the couple's careful silence about their past. Something people whispered when Mike and Debbie weren't in the room. And then there was the Halloween detail that nobody who heard it could shake. Sheila, known to every employee as Debbie, had appeared at the Purple Cow one Halloween in full clown makeup. She had dressed as a clown voluntarily in front of her staff, smiling. A woman who investigators believed had worn that exact costume to execute Marlene Warren was putting the face paint back on at a Tennessee drive-thru like it was a fun holiday tradition. Like it meant nothing. Like she had completely gotten away with it and had nothing left to fear. On August 31, 2017, a grand jury in Palm Beach County returned an indictment, first-degree murder, with a firearm. 27 years after Marlene Warren had opened her front door and smiled at a bouquet of carnations, the legal machinery that had stalled and stuttered and gone silent for decades finally lurched back into motion. Detectives located Sheila and Michael in Virginia. They watched, they planned, they waited for the right moment. On September 26, 2017, Sheila Keen Warren was driving near her home in Abingdon when law enforcement pulled her over. She was placed under arrest. And in those first raw seconds, before attorneys, before strategy, before the legal machinery kicked in, Sheila Keene Warren asked one question. Not what is this about? Not I want a lawyer. Not I don't understand. She looked at the officers and said, "Are you going to arrest him too?" He pointed directly at Michael Warren. In 7 words, Sheila told investigators everything they had believed for 27 years. She knew exactly why she was being arrested. She considered Michael equally responsible for what happened on May 26, 1990, and her first instinct in the moment of her own capture was not to deny, not to deflect. It was to make sure he didn't escape the same net she had just fallen into. Prosecutors noted it immediately. It was the most honest thing Sheila Keene Warren had said since the morning the clown walked calmly away from Marlene's porch. Joey got a phone call. He had spent 27 years carrying the weight of a promise made at his mother's bedside. 27 years of anniversaries that broke him open every time. 27 years of visits to a grave in the dark, of questions with no answers, of a life he had nearly destroyed trying to survive grief that had nowhere to go. Now someone was telling him an arrest had been made. He said later that the emotion of that moment was almost impossible to put into words. 27 years compressed into a single phone call, every anniversary, every breakdown, every night at that grave when he had asked his mother for help and gotten only silence back. It had come. 27 years late. But it had finally come. Sheila was extradited to Florida, booked into Palm Beach County Jail, and charged with first-degree murder with a firearm. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg stood before cameras and announced the prosecution would be seeking the death penalty. Sheila pleaded not guilty. Her defense attorney, Greg Rosenfeld, went to work immediately, calling the DNA evidence unreliable, pointing to mishandled evidence bags, arguing the entire case was built on decades-old material that had been contaminated and compromised beyond use. He said Sheila was innocent, said the state was desperate to close a notorious cold case and had fixed its sights on the wrong woman without ever letting the evidence lead elsewhere. Michael Warren issued a statement from Virginia. His wife had nothing to do with Marlene's murder. He stood completely behind her innocence. The investigation had never been fair. He said all the right things in all the right order. And then Sheila's booking photo was released. She was 61 years old. 27 years had passed since the morning she had walked away from Marlene Warren's porch. The death penalty was now on the table. In the booking photo, she was smiling. The same unbothered, direct expression she had worn in her teenage mugshot when she was first arrested at 17. Decades of living in between, a murder charge hanging over her head, the state seeking her execution. She smiled for the camera like it was a minor inconvenience. Sheila had pointed at Michael the moment the handcuffs snapped shut. But legally, the state only had a case against her. Now a massive legal battle was preparing to begin in Palm Beach County. The defense was already sharpening every argument they had, ready to show a jury that 27 years of dust, missing files, and compromised evidence had rotted the foundation of the prosecution's case from the inside out. The trap had shut, but the cage wasn't locked yet. And as the courtroom doors prepared to open, one question sat at the center of everything. Could the ghost of 1990 truly survive a modern trial? Or was the killer clown about to walk away free after all this time with nothing left to stop her? The arrest felt like the end. It wasn't. For the next 5 years, Sheila Keene Warren sat in Palm Beach County Jail waiting for a trial that kept refusing to arrive. The case was postponed 6 times. 6 separate trial dates were set. 6 times something collapsed the timeline and pushed it further into the future. First, it was the sheer volume of evidence, decades of accumulated files, photographs, witness statements, forensic reports, and legal filings that both sides needed months to process. Then, COVID-19 shut the courts down entirely. Then, more delays. Then, more filings. Then, more arguments about what evidence would even be allowed in front of a jury. 5 years, in a jail cell, waiting, and while Sheila waited, the case against her was quietly coming apart at the seams. The evidence problems had started long before the arrest. But now, with the trial approaching, every flaw was being held under a microscope by a defense team that knew exactly what they were looking at. The evidence bags from the 1990 investigation were pulled out of storage. What the defense found was difficult to explain away. The bags were torn open, not slightly. Gaping holes wide enough for contamination to enter freely over decades of storage. One bag contained the comparison clown wig that investigators had purchased in 1990 to test against the fibers found in the LeBaron. The wig was partially sticking out of the open bag. Defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld held it up in court and described it accurately. Horrifying. This was the physical container holding the most critical fiber evidence in a first-degree murder case, and it had been sitting in a compromised storage area open to the environment for over 30 years. Defense argued it immediately. Cross-contamination, unreliable chain of custody, inadmissible. If those fibers had been exposed to outside material for decades, how could any jury be asked to trust what the lab found on them? Then something worse happened. One of the prosecution's key witnesses, the detective who had personally compiled and could walk a jury through the complete chain of custody for the fiber evidence, died before the trial began. Without him on the stand, prosecutors faced a devastating gap. They could present the fibers. They could not fully authenticate how every piece had been collected, stored, and preserved in an unbroken chain from 1990 to today. In criminal law, a broken chain of custody doesn't just weaken evidence, it can get it thrown out entirely. Then the costume store witnesses were ruled inadmissible. 2 employees from Spotlight Capezio who had identified Sheila from a photo lineup back in 1990, one of the clearest human connections between Sheila and the clown costume, were disqualified due to inconsistencies and conflicting accounts that had accumulated across multiple interviews over the decades. 30 years of time does that to memory. Details shift, stories evolve slightly, and a defense attorney with sharp eyes and the right questions can turn those small evolutions into reasonable doubt faster than most people expect. The prosecution was watching their case erode piece by piece. Every day that passed had made it harder. Witnesses died, memories faded, evidence aged, and the defense was using every single one of those years against them with surgical precision. 2 weeks before the trial was finally scheduled to begin, the prosecution made the call. On April 25, 2023, Sheila Keene Warren changed her plea. Not guilty became guilty. Not first-degree murder. Second-degree murder, a charge that carries no death penalty, no mandatory life sentence, and under Florida's 1990 sentencing guidelines, allowed for significant credit toward time already served. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. She had already served over 5.5 years in Palm Beach County Jail while waiting for trial. Under Florida's gain time law, which calculates sentence reductions based on the law in effect at the time of the crime, not at the time of sentencing, her release date was not years away. It was approximately 16 months away. The prosecution explained their decision simply and honestly. They believed Sheila was guilty. They had always believed it. But the fear, the real, documented fear that lived inside that prosecutor's office, was going to trial with compromised evidence and aging witnesses and losing. A not guilty verdict would mean double jeopardy. It would mean Sheila Keene Warren could never be tried for Marlene's murder again for as long as she lived. A guaranteed conviction on second-degree murder was worth more than a gamble on first-degree that might hand her complete freedom. They needed her guilty plea on record. They needed her to stand in open court and say, "Yes, I did this." And she did. The courtroom went still as Sheila Keene Warren answered the judge's question out loud, on the record, in front of everyone. "Yes, I agree with that factual basis." 33 years after Marlene Warren opened her front door for the last time, the woman who had been standing on that porch finally admitted it in a court of law. Joey stood up to deliver his victim impact statement. He had waited 33 years for this moment. He had nearly destroyed himself waiting for it. He had sat at his mother's grave in the dark more times than he could count, talking to someone who couldn't answer, asking for something that felt like it would never come. Now he was standing in a Palm Beach County courtroom, looking at the woman who had taken his mother from him, and he said what he saw. "I didn't see any remorse. Not an apology, not a break in the composure." Sheila sat through the sentencing the same way she had sat through everything, steady, controlled, expression giving nothing away. Joey said what needed to be said and sat down. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg stepped to the microphone. His statement was short and precise. Sheila Keene Warren will always be an admitted convicted murderer and will wear that stain for every day for the rest of her life. Then Michael Warren released a statement from Virginia. He said his wife had not committed this crime, said it was difficult to watch her plead guilty to something she didn't do, and then he added the line that told everyone exactly how he had been calculating this situation from the very beginning. It wasn't worth the gamble when she was offered a deal that will have her home in 16 to 18 months. Her home. Back with him. That was the math. That was always the math. On November 2nd, 24, Sheila Keene Warren walked out of a Florida prison 18 months after pleading guilty to the murder of Marlene Warren. 34 years after the morning she had put on an orange wig and white face paint and driven a stolen car to a house in Wellington. She was 61 years old and she was free. Michael Warren was waiting. They returned together to Kingsport, Tennessee, the same town where they had run the Purple Cow, where neighbors had known them as Mike and Debbie, where nobody had known about any of this for years. His defense attorney released a statement on his behalf after her release. We are absolutely thrilled that Ms. Keene Warren has been released from prison and is returning to her family. As we've stated from the beginning, she did not commit this crime. Michael Warren has never been charged with anything connected to Marlene's murder. He has never been arrested for it. He has never stood in a courtroom and answered for it. He is free, living his life in Tennessee right now, today as you watch this. The man who left for the racetrack that morning. The man every employee at Bargain Motors pointed to. The man whose own wife named him before she died. The man Sheila pointed at the moment she was arrested. Free. Joey went to his mother's grave after the plea. He stood there the way he had stood there so many times before, but this time it was different. This time he wasn't asking questions. This time he wasn't lost in the dark with nowhere to put the pain. He looked at that headstone and said what he had promised her 33 years ago in a hospital room when she was on life support and he was 21 years old and terrified. We did it, Mom. We finally got justice. Somewhere in Michigan, in a quiet room in Marlene's mother Shirley's home, there is still a painting on the wall. A clown, smiling, painted by a teenage girl named Marlene McKinnon, who loved clowns because they meant joy and color and innocence. She painted it with her own hands. She could not have known when she set that brush down what a clown would one day mean for the rest of her life. Shirley has kept it there all these years. She said once, "I don't hate clowns, I just hate one." Marlene Warren opened that door with a smile on her face. She reached for the flowers. She thought someone had sent her something beautiful. Those were her last happy seconds. Standing in the sunshine, in the safest neighborhood in America, holding carnations from a clown who had been planning this moment for months. The woman who pulled the trigger served 18 months and went home. The man who investigators believe sent her there never spent a single day in prison for it. And Marlene's son spent 33 years of his life, his 20s, his 30s, his 40s, climbing out of the wreckage that one Saturday morning created, rebuilding himself piece by piece, carrying a promise to a woman who deserved so much more than what justice was able to deliver. That is the part nobody tells you about true crime. The case closes. The documents get filed. The convicted murderer goes home, and the people left behind just keep living with it. Before you go, I want to ask you 3 things. First, Michael Warren has never been charged. The evidence pointed at him from the very first anonymous call on the afternoon of the murder. Do you think he should have faced trial, and why do you think prosecutors never went after him? Second, Sheila pleaded guilty, but her attorney still publicly says she is innocent. She admitted it in court to get a deal. Does a forced guilty plea feel like real justice to you, or does it feel like something else? Third, Joey said he found closure when Sheila pleaded guilty. But the man his mother specifically named is still free. Do you think Joey actually got justice, or just the closest thing to it that the system could offer? Leave your answers below. And if this story stayed with you, you already know what to do.